So welcome everyone to the strengths-based approach session, how peer specialists improve the shared experience of their peers. And before we begin with introductions, we're going to take a moment to review how the polling function will work for you as participants, in case you're just joining us for the first time. So today is Tuesday, September 28th at 4 o'clock here in Chicago. Douglas, do you have the QR slide? Did you include that?
Oh, I think it's not here. I'm
okay.
Pretty sorry about that.
The QR will appear on each of the question slides.
Okay.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so don't have the QR code to show you, but if you go on slido.com, you'll see a screen that looks like this. And at the top, at the blue box where it says joining as a participant, if you can enter advocacy track, no spaces in between, into the blue box where it says enter the code here. So if you can do that now. Then the next slide. So once you do that, you'll come to the next screen that'll say select the Tuesday, the yellow Tuesday 4 p.m. with Douglas and my name on it. My name is Lisa. And again, today is Tuesday, 4 o'clock here in Chicago. Next slide. And then the next screen you'll see will look like this. And if you can check that you're in the correct day and time in the top left-hand corner of the screen, it should say Tuesday, 4 o'clock. Again, that's a time here in Chicago, and it should say, it's not showing up here now, it should say Douglas and Lisa. And if that's not what's showing on your screen right now, if you can click down on that down arrow, and then you can select the time for today. And then also to the right of that are two tabs that you'll see, which is the Q&A tab and the polls tab. If you click on the polls tab now, this will allow you to see and answer our polling questions during the session. Your turn.
All right. So welcome everybody to our strengths-based session. It's a privilege to have you all here. I think just a little bit of sharing the inspiration for the session, I think partially was there's a lot of confusion about what is peer support, what are peer support services, and what do peer support specialists actually do? What's the work like? So that really, I think, was the inspiration for our session. Our loose agenda for today is Lisa and I will introduce ourselves. We'll share a little bit more about our unique wellness stories. Then we're going to talk about the difference of just regular old life versus a trained use of experience. There are two things there. And then we're going to get into the difference between peer support, human to human, versus peer support services. And then we'll move to sort of that topic of, I'm a certified peer specialist. Well, what exactly does that mean? Are you a trained peer specialist, meaning you've taken a training, which many have done? Or are you one step beyond that, which is a certified state credentialed peer specialist? Once we talk about those differences, we'll go more deeply into the work that actually peer specialists do. We'll do a little bit of a quick overview of what are the core skills, which I like to think of as the core of the core of the core. And then we'll end with just a short statement on the need and how that need can be tapped into, and how much need there is, and the role that peer specialists will play. So that's my goofy face there. My name is Douglas Hulst. and I am DBSA's Peer Specialist Workforce Development Program Manager. My primary responsibilities at DBSA are related to supporting the peer specialist workforce through training and demonstration projects. And for those of you that were in the session with Phyllis just prior, Phyllis talked about some of those demonstration projects, in particular, the one I worked on called Senior Strength. Very quickly, what brought me to DBSA and the privilege, the honor to be with all of you today? The way I tell it now, the story is always evolving, but there were 3 moments of wellness, 3 key moments to my wellness journey. Very quickly, first wellness moment for me was coming to terms with my sexual orientation in my late teens. Second, wellness journey moment for me was a major depressive episode over my senior year of college, and then about 5 years of extreme generalized anxiety disorder, which impacted the whole trajectory of my adult life. And the third big wellness bullet point for me is I became dependent upon the substance of alcohol, even though I was that guy that was never going to do that, but I did. And I'm grateful to share with all of you humbly, as well as proud to say I've been sober now from alcohol for about 7 years. What I'll end with quickly is I've known a lot of privilege on my journey. I've known a lot of pain. I've been knocked down. I've learned to stand up. I've been silent. And I've shared that story, the stories carefully, gently, and then also the way I just did just now with an audience. And that sharing, that supporting through our stories is really the essence of peer support, and really at the core and the heart of the work of a peer support specialist. So Lisa, on to you.
Thanks, Douglas. So again, hello to everybody and welcome to our strengths-based approach session. Thank you again for being here to hopefully engage, share, and hopefully learn from one another how the practice of peer support specialists can be rooted in a positive strength-based approach. Today we'll learn about what peer support specialists are and what they do from a positive and strength-focused perspective. Again, my name is Lisa Gaduco, and I am the coordinator in the advocacy team. My main responsibility is overseeing our peer engagement program, which is essentially our peer specialist course training. I'm also involved with our advocacy newsletter called Making Mental Health Matters. And I also provide support to DBSA's work with a coalition group called Mental Health Liaison Group. And this is a coalition of national organizations representing advocates in the mental health space with federal policies. Just a brief background on me. I've been with DBSA for 4 years now. I came to the national office initially as a volunteer, and instantly found purpose and meaning not only in the organization's mission to provide hope, help, support, and education to improve the lives of people who have mood disorder, but also in the day-to-day work that continuously reminds me of my own connection to a calling in serving others. Others who, like me, have family members who live with mental health conditions, as well as my own experience with anxiety. Next slide. Douglas.
So thank you, Lisa. I was catching my breath for a moment. There is, so there's our a QR code. I am thankful that it's there. So for those of you who can scan the QR code, or those of you who choose to go in through the web to sign in and to log in, what words come to mind when you hear lived experience? We've got one so far. Thank you. I love it. Past, daily life, wisdom, what you have dealt with, individual in recovery, any more. What words come to mind when you have lived experience? Things I have overcome, daily life, the ability, oh, you're typing, thank you all. The ability to share personal anecdotes with others, lived experience. It's one of my favorite phrases, lived experience. But the next slide, I'll talk about how it definitely threw me for a loop. Wisdom, struggle, I'm in the same boat. Lived experience. Thank you so much for sharing. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And it can have a positive connotation. It can have a negative connotation. Sometimes just a neutral. Someone wrote tragedy. Yeah, thank you. Resilience. Thank you too. One of my favorite words. What words come to mind when you hear lived experience? Thank you all for engaging. It's fun for us to see in real time what's on your mind and how you're reacting, as well as just awesome feedback to hear what your perspectives are on that phrase. All right, let me see if I can get this to go forward. There we go. So, lived experience, what does that mean? So I'm going to share an example and a story, and it's now going to be with me for the rest of my life because it put me on the spot so much. So I was leading a half-day seminar on supervising peer support specialists. The seminar was for about 50 or so licensed clinical social workers. So at one point, I'm up there in front of them, and one of them just kind of says very, very sincerely, energetically, I don't get it. I don't get this thing called lived experience. All humans live. Thus, all human beings have lived experience. So what is the difference? What's so special about peer support and peer support specialists? I can tell you all truthfully, I have really no recollection of how I answered that in the moment because I was so frozen in the spot. I'm sure I just kind of stumbled through something and said something like, well, what does it mean to you? And invited the audience to answer. But after a while, honestly, about a year of thinking about it, this is what I came up with. And this is what I want to share with you right now purposefully, which is, if I could go back in time, I would say to that person, yes, of course, all human beings have lived experience, but peer support specialists have lived experience in 1, 2, or 3 core categories of either trauma and or mood disorder and or substance disorder issues. And they choose to share and disclose and are trained and certified, even with state credentials, to view that lived experience as a skill set. So that's what sets peer support and peer support specialists apart from the general public, from all of us just living life. They have those core 3 areas and they make the choice to share and be trained and certified to use them to help others. Lisa.
Okay, so now we'd also like to get another gauge from you all, what your thoughts are when you think about providing positive peer support. what traits come to your mind or what you associate with when you hear the words positive peer support. So we're going to take, again, another few moments now for your feedback.
Beautiful.
Yeah, really nice. Thank you so much. Please keep typing in. Definitely all in line with what's considered positive. Active listening. Douglas and I will touch on that a little bit in our presentation. Daily guidance, affirmation, empathy, giving people a sense they are not alone, compassion, all good things. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. So for DBSA, we look at the topic of peer support and peer support specialists in 3 distinct categories. First is the category of general peer support. This is when one person supports another person from the framework of, I've been through something similar to this. Let's talk in the hope that I can support you in a time of crisis or in a time of need. In this category, the person offering the support doesn't necessarily have to have the lived experience as Douglas has mentioned, with trauma, a mood disorder, or a substance use disorder. Another example of this type of support is at a different level would be a setting like Alcoholics Anonymous or an AA sponsor or support, where one person supports, mentors, or sponsors a peer. But, and this is a key to understanding this, there's no formal training with the person who's providing the support in either of these scenarios. One person can listen, as you all have noted in our word cloud previously, and support another without any form of disclosure on the person providing the support.
So the second category for us here at DBSA is a trained peer support specialist. And then this falls into that, that area of peer support services. So what Lisa was just mentioning was peer support, human to human, mentor to mentor. There's no formality to it. There's no training. There's no services, volunteer or paid. And this is where this category identifies it and it changes. So to be a trained peer support specialist, you'll be offering some kind of services. As I just said, either volunteer or paid. In order to offer these services, you have to have lived experience, again, with trauma and or a mood disorder issue and or a substance use disorder issue, 1, 2, or all 3. Most trained peer support specialists, and they're also called recovery coaches if they're in that arena and supporting people mainly in a substance use disorder category, but it's still peer support and peer support specialist work. Most of them have taken a training of anywhere from a day up to what DBSA now offers. We have a full 5-week, 70+ hour course experience. A trained, and that's the word, trained peer support specialist shares their authentic truth and is trained to use their story to inspire hope to help others improve their lives.
The third category of the peer support specialist workforce is the state certified and credentialed peer support specialist. This person must be formally trained as a peer support specialist and usually must log in the necessary documented number of hours providing direct support either as a paid or volunteer work. These individuals must take a state-approved exam, most often administered by a group or organization called the International Certification and Reciprocity Consortium. That's a mouthful, or ICRC. Almost all 50 states offer a state-level peer support specialist credential. DBSA regards a state-certified credential as the highest level a peer support specialist can obtain. Each state's requirements are unique. And after an initial peer support specialist or recovery coach training, it's common that candidates will then need to log in, again, volunteer or paid hours that are usually supervised and signed off on, depending on their respective state requirements. So this could be anywhere from 1 to 2 or up to 3,000 hours. Actually, Douglas has recently gotten his state of Illinois credentials, so he can speak more on this topic.
Yes, Lisa, thank you. My entry into the arena of trained peer support specialists and state certified and credentialed peer support specialist work actually started in Michigan. At the time, Michigan's credentialing policies were changing. And I also knew that I was going to be returning to Illinois to live and work in Chicago for the majority of my career. So I decided to hold off on getting state certified and credentialed in Michigan and wait till I was back living in Illinois and logging hours. Yes, I took my exam administered by the Illinois Certification Board. And the exam is run by, as you mentioned, the ICNRC. I'm going to say it again, the International Certification and Reciprocity Consortium. Yes, it's a mouthful. I took it back in mid-August, and I'm grateful to share that I passed. I want to share real quickly with those. I wasn't planning to do this, but the exam for my credential was 75 questions. And what I've shared with people, about 25 I found to be very easy. They're all multiple choice. About 25 I thought made me really think. And about 25 of the questions, in my opinion, to me, looking at having done the exam, I found very challenging, where they were really guiding you to one answer, but the better answer was really all about the work of the peer, not the work of the clinician, which they were trying to confuse you. So I am very relieved that I took my test and I passed, but also I love the fact that I now know what to expect and how to support others as they prepare for that test, either in Illinois or other states. In Illinois, there's two options in terms of what I was going for. The first option was the CRSS, Certified Recovery Support Specialist. This credential is very desirable in Illinois. It is the most connected to reimbursable billing codes for peer support through Medicaid. And the other credential, which I got, the bottom one there, is the CPRS, the Certified Peer Recovery Specialist. That's a newer credential, and it has more application around the country, and it's more transferable. And in my role as a trainer for DBSA, it just made more sense to get that credit, although that credential, although I might get the other one too at some point.
Okay, so to review, since it can get confusing, DBSA considers there to be 3 categories of peer support and peer support specialist work and services. These categories are general peer support, trained peer support specialists work with disclosure, and finally, state certified and credentialed peer support specialist work with disclosure. Peer support services is a formal volunteer or paid position. Much like a paralegal position is considered as a paraprofessional role, in that they serve as an adjunct role to working with clinicians, but the emphasis is it's not clinical and never should be. Trained peer support specialists and state certified and credentialed peer support specialists are one lane of care on a highway, so to speak, or a continuum of care, which is comprised primarily of psychiatrists, psychiatric nurses, clinical psychologists, social workers, therapists, and for approximately the last 20 years, trained or certified and state credentialed peer support specialists. The role continues to evolve and grow, and there's much opportunity for demonstrating value given the intellectual and emotional stressors of the pandemic.
All right. This is hopefully a fun little quiz before we talk to you a little bit more deeply about what peer specialists do. So the question is, what role is the peer support specialist trained not to provide, not to do? So what you see listed, what is the peer specialist really not supposed to do? Anyone else? We'll just wait one more moment. Because all of you nailed it. No, peer specialists don't run errands and do that kind of stuff for the people they serve. They may help a person to accomplish those goals of getting groceries or getting dry cleaning or getting things, and figure out how to in a self-determined manner accomplish it. But that isn't what a peer specialist is supposed to do. So clearly we have an audience that knows what they're talking about. Now I'm suddenly much more nervous, Lisa. Okay. So I think a lot of you probably know this, but this is going to be a good review, I hope. So what, hopefully we've given you at least some clarity on those three categories through our DBSA lens: peer support, person to person, human to human, and then peer support services, either trained or state certified and credentialed. Hopefully the way we presented that has given all of you a little bit more clarity on the roles that, as Lisa mentioned, in the continuum of care where peer support specialists and the services that they provide reside. But what do they actually do? What are they trained to do, and how do they do it? So the core skills of a peer support specialist are actually quite simple. They're not rocket science, as my training mentor said to me many times. They are, in very simple terms, to reflect upon your lived experience, to develop a story, to be trained to view that story as a skill, part of a skill set, to develop the core of the core skills of listening, asking open-ended questions, and using the responses you get to gauge where a person may be in their unique journey. That process will guide a person on how to use the short, medium, or long version of their story. And when they pull out a slice, what kind of a tone to apply to one of those versions. So to speak as clearly and authentically as I can, peer support specialists meet people where they are. They never try to fix. They never should on you or you should do on you. They hopefully ignite a spark of motivation to help a person move in a direction of wellness and maybe even goal definition and goal pursuit, which an individual would decide upon of their own accord via self-determination.
Okay, so we're going to take a better look at the process for peer support specialists. As Douglas had brought up the question, what do they do? What are the most basic standard operating procedures for a peer support specialist? While they sit next to those they serve, And what is the work like in its simplest form? And as mentioned before by Douglas, it's not rocket science, but it can also be both basic and profound. When a peer support specialist first meets with a person, their first initial frame of mind is best rooted in openness to seeing where the person is at on their unique journey. And then the peer specialist listens with careful intention. And as we mentioned before, this is, or we haven't, but it was brought up in the poll responses, that it's active listening, right? It's proactive listening. And you're meeting the person where they're at and then carefully listening, which is a skill to be learned, to be trained on, and to continually develop, to strive to best gauge where the person is at. And then a peer specialist also listens with careful intention, with the hope that they'll inspire a person to share more. And then in addition, trust can be gained using a tool that's called motivational interviewing, where an open-ended questions are asked. Questions which, these are questions that don't typically generate a yes or no closed response, but rather inspire sharing more information. An example would be as when you think about returning to the office from a weekend, and someone asks you, did you have a good weekend? And this kind of question, it's a yes or no response question. It's not, it doesn't gauge like, or open up much information sharing, which can be expressed in this type of exchange. But when you approach it from an open-ended framework, instead of asking how was your weekend, asking what did you do this weekend, you'll likely inspire a much more dynamic expression and sharing and exchange of information. In turn, this exchange can lead to asking even more open-ended questions and even more information flowing. So the question is, why ask open-ended questions of a person who needs support? The goal is to use these responses to best identify where a person may be at in the stages of change model, or DBSA's own framework is the 5 stages of recovery. And these are the impact of illness, life is limited, change is possible, commitment to change, and actions for change. This is likened again to the widely known stages of change model, which is it's 6 more steps or 6 more stages and different names, pretty much are in line with DBSA's 5 stages of recovery. And the stages of model are pre-contemplation, contemplation, determination, action, reoccurrence, and finally maintenance. Regardless of the recovery models in this sequence, it's not expected to unfold in a linear way. It could, but it's not expected.
Thank you, Lisa. So we obviously don't have time to go into more depth of what Lisa just shared with you all. But for the purposes of this session, I think what's important to understand is that most individuals are on a recovery journey. It's a recovery process. It can take months, it can take years, it can even take decades, depending upon the individual. For me, personally, my journey, my story was fairly linear in nature, especially when I think about the 3rd bullet point of my substance use disorder issue. As a peer support specialist, you will, to reiterate some of the things Lisa expressed, you will listen. You will ask open-ended questions to learn where a person is in the 5 stages of recovery or in the stages of change. And then, and this is really the core of the core of the core, when you get a sense of where the person is, that helps you to know in that very specific moment how to use your story. And in simplest terms, it's thinking of your story with a short, medium, or long version. And once you decide which version, which piece to share in that moment, what kind of tone do you apply?
As a support specialist continuously meets with the peer they're supporting, this process repeats over and over, as Douglas has mentioned, building rapport over time and rapport and trust with those needing support. Over time, and again in increments, a person gently heads in a direction of greater wellness. All are potentially part of this experience. And it's the role of the peer support specialist to authentically engage most deeply with those that they support than their clinical care team may have the capacity or bandwidth to do. Again, peer support specialists are never a replacement for clinical care. Peer support specialists are part of this comprehensive team. Each have their own respective lanes, and those are psychiatrists, psychiatric nurses, clinical psychologists, social worker, and peer support specialists. In the event a person does not have access to clinical support, then a peer support specialist can be an alternative to no support. But a peer support specialist is never a replacement for any member of a clinical care team. If clinical care cannot be provided, perhaps the support of a peer support specialist can.
So as an example of one of the key communities we support, it's the veteran community. One of the challenges for the role of the peer support specialist is that it is relatively a new job per se. It's been around, give or take, a few years in either direction since about approximately the year 2000. And as such, it is very much a still developing workforce. And part of that development is where that workforce is employed and who's paying them. So in the case of peer support specialists, one of DBSA's continual pushes is having the work of the peer support specialist be as reimbursable as Medicare and Medicaid will allow. It is basically, if you're doing the work, helping people to have roles where they're getting paid. And I mentioned that veterans are one of the key communities we support. The world's largest health organization, which the world's largest organization by some measures, which employs peer support specialists, is the Veterans Health Administration, or the VHA, or the VA for short. This is the main entity that we work with in training peer support specialists. In addition to the VA, we also work with organizations such as Volunteers of America. And we work with a very large Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health as well.
The future opportunities for DBSA peer supporters and peer support specialist courses continue to expand on nearly a daily basis. We're certainly excited about these opportunities and accept the challenge to push through the obstacles these opportunities also present. One obstacle will be the continuing confusion about the language used to talk about peers. So as we begin to wind down here in our presentation, we're going to take some questions and have a discussion in a few minutes. Just a friendly reminder that peer support is anytime a person supports another. There's no training, again, no requirement for lived experience. It's one person listening to and supporting another. And then there's a peer support can also be found in mutual aid support groups that we mentioned before, such as Alcoholics Anonymous or AA, or Smart Recovery, or DBSA's own support groups. This type of support can be in a group setting with those who share a lived experience. Disclosure is usually held in confidentiality as people listen and offer support through mutual shared lived experience. So for this too, there's again, no requirement for any type of training. And then there's the work of the peer support, which we define as part of peer support services. This is where a person, again, is a trained peer support specialist and either volunteers or is in a paid position. This requires a lived experience with trauma, substance use disorder, and or a mood disorder. And then lastly, there is the peer support specialist who is, again, also state certified and credentialed. This peer support specialist has passed, as mentioned, Douglas has mentioned previously, a state exam along with fulfilling their state requirements for credentialing.
So I'm going to move really quickly through this last two slides so we have enough time for a few questions. I think the message is pretty clear. I think Phyllis touched upon it in her session prior for those of you who were there. We have an understaffed and an overburdened mental health and wellness workforce. Peer specialists can dynamically support that workforce. They can reduce burnout. They can lower costs, and the data on that, I think, continues to grow and grow and grow. And lastly, this is actually what maybe would have been more appropriate for Lisa's final comments, this slide, but just if we leave you with nothing else, it's our perspective on peer support, because there's so much confusion out there in the world that has nothing to do with peer support. In the world that's very deep in it, there's still confusion. But for our purposes, we just want you to leave you with hopefully this understanding that there's human to human peer support. And then the next step is I've got trained and I choose to disclose and share and support. And then the final step, if you choose to go to it, is all the way to a state certification and state credential. To be very explicit with all of you as we end here, DBSA supports all three of these buckets. All three are desperately needed. All three are wonderful and awesome. And we hope that you can take advantage of them and maybe even be a peer specialist yourself. So with that, we have a couple more minutes. Can we try to answer some questions for you? Thank you so much. Thank you, Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
Let me look in the chat. Let me see here. I don't see any.
I don't see any
thank you,
questions.
Barb, you have a really good question if you're still with us. And Barb's question is, why do I hear peer support specialist as opposed to peer specialist? Honestly, Barb, that's $1 million question. And Lisa, if I may, I'm gonna try to tackle it. To the best of, I will say, Barb, I don't fully know 100% myself. To the best of my understanding, though, SAMHSA's definition uses peer support specialist, but the VA, when they created positions and began to elevate that workforce, they say peer specialist. So it's all the same. I, as an employee of DBSA, I like to just say the whole title, peer support specialist. That's the one I most relate to and connect to. But that's the best answer. I know there's a lot more details to that, but that's what I know right now, Barb. Thank you for a great question. Anybody else? Am I scrolling through the chat? Andrew, do you see anything else?
No other questions here on my end.
Oop. All right, let me stop share.
So we'll give it just a moment to see if anybody else has any questions for us. And if you prefer not to type your question into the chat, please feel free to use the reactions button at the bottom. If you raise your hand, let us know that that you have a question. We can unmute you so you can ask your question. We just have the call set up with everyone on mute so as not to have chaos here on the call. Colleen, I see you have a question.
Yes, I am a newly certified peer support specialist, and I live in a small rural community. What is the best way to market myself to the agencies in my area?
Oh, that's a good one. I see Nicole shaking her head. Nicole, do you want to answer that? I have it's a great question, Nicole, Colleen. I'll throw my 2 cents in. And Nicole, please join in if you want to. It's such a confusing arena. The way I would go is I would first go to your individual state's Department of Mental Health and Wellness and see if you can find from them a listing of all your local mental health and wellness organizations. So for example, I co-reside in Illinois and Michigan. In Michigan, each county has a mental health and wellness department. For me, that I think would be a great place to start, is to see where your nearest county or local state mental health organization is, and then connect with individuals there and see what can be spooled out from there. That's my first thought, Colleen.
If I can throw in another couple of resources for you, Colleen, we normally refer people. This is more on a national scale, and you know, to me, it's about networking, right? And you're never going to know who down the line that you connect with presently who can refer you in the future. So two organizations that we usually refer people to, because we don't provide job placement services or anything like that, DBSA, but I'm not sure if you're familiar with NAPS, the National Association of Peer Specialists, and they have a really good resource on their website. I know they have job postings. We also referred people to usjobs.gov. And if you type in under, you know, they'll have a search bar at the top, peer specialist apprentice or anything peer specialist related. I've done this myself. You'll get a whole host of, and it'll be all, you know, throughout the country. So you'll get a listing, and I'm not sure if you can, you know, weed it out if you want it like local specific to your state. So those are the two resources we usually offer to people. Again, because we don't usually provide marketing, but it's a great question, especially in this forum. So,
Phyllis, did you have a comment too?
Yeah, I was just, I mean, Lisa answered the question beautifully, but I was just also going to mention that, you know, your community behavioral health centers are typically funded by the US government, and the government pays for peer support specialist service, for peer support services. So the first place that I might go, depending on how large your community is, and you know, it might be a small community, but somewhere within the radius is going to be a community behavioral health center. I'd go there and, you know, and talk to the director of clinical operations, because they would be very familiar with the services of a peer support specialist, and that they might be have a network where they might even be able to, you know, suggest other places for you.
And I want to say thank you to Lisa. You actually answered the question before I asked it. Someone else asked, is there an association for peer support specialists? So thank you for providing that. And I would like to thank everyone for joining us for this call. We are at time. The one thing I wanted to share with everybody before you go is that in between sessions, you're also welcome to go through the lobby and check out some of the other resources that are available through the Leadership Summit and through the lobby. There's things like relaxation techniques and opportunities to talk to other advocates, other peers, other chapter support leaders, as well as some DBSA resources. And we will have our next session beginning at the top of the next hour. That call is on a different Zoom link. We'll be using the Zoom webinar feature. And so in order to join us for that call, you will need to go back through the lobby and click on the link for the advocacy track. Douglas, can you give us the title of the session?
I had to think for a second. It's the effectiveness of peer specialists in mental health recovery, a clinical perspective. And what it is a rare opportunity to listen to and learn from 3 clinicians on how they were exposed to peer specialist work and why they believe in it.
So we encourage everyone to join us for that session as well. And we look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.